It was October 2019, and the air in the remote Siberian village of Ust-Kut was crisp with the first bite of winter. That day, the villagers gathered for their small autumn festival, a cherished tradition. Children ran between makeshift stalls selling warm pastries and handmade trinkets, while the adults laughed and chattered despite the cold air. Soon enough, it would be winter, and there wouldn't be as many occasions for the villagers to celebrate. But danger lurked just beyond the edge of town, hidden in the thick forest that bordered the village. Hunger gnawed at the belly of a massive Russian grizzly bear, its hulking frame covered in a matted coat that barely concealed its ribs. The scarcity of food had driven the beast closer to human settlements. The scent of roasted meat and sweet pastries wafting from the festival proved too appealing to resist. Then suddenly, the village dogs started barking. Their desperate yelps cut through the festive atmosphere, drawing nervous glances from the villagers. Then came the growls, a deep sound that silenced the crowd. Heads turned toward the woods, where the massive grizzly emerged like a nightmare from the shadows. The bear stood over 7 feet tall on its hind legs, its yellowed fangs bared and its black eyes glinting with predatory focus. For a moment, the villagers froze. Living in a remote Siberian village, they were used to wildlife, but it was usual for a bear to come that close to a noisy gathering. Chaos erupted. Mothers grabbed their children and bolted toward the safety of nearby buildings. Stalls were abandoned, the contents spilling onto the ground as the crowd scattered in panic. Senior police officer Ivan Kuznetsov had been leaning against his patrol car, sipping from a cup of tea, when the commotion began. At 42, Ivan was a seasoned officer who had seen his share of danger, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of the charging grizzly. The bear's sheer size and speed were astonishing, its powerful limbs tearing through the festival grounds like a force of nature. Instinct took over. Ivan tossed aside his cup and sprinted toward the chaos, his hand reaching for the pistol holstered at his hip. The villagers screamed his name, begging him to run, but Ivan knew he couldn't. The bear was heading straight for a cluster of children huddled near a toppled stall, their wide eyes filled with terror. Ivan's boots pounded against the frozen earth as he closed the distance. He drew his pistol, the weapon's weight familiar and reassuring in his grip, and raised it. The first shot rang out, and the bullet struck the bear's shoulder, jerking its massive frame to the side. The beast roared in pain, a horrible sound that shook Ivan. He fired again, and this time, the shot grazed the bear's flank, drawing blood but failing to stop its advance. The bear turned its attention from the children to Ivan, the source of its pain. Lowering its head, it charged with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. Ivan barely had time to react. He fired 2 more shots, but the bullet seemed to do little more than enrage the beast further. Its thick hide and layers of muscle absorbed the impact, the blood dripping from its wounds only fueling its fury. As the bear closed in, Ivan reached for his baton, his pistol now useless with no time to reload. The beast reared up on its hind legs, towering over him, its claws slicing through the air. Ivan swung the baton with all his strength, landing a blow against the bear's muzzle. The strike wasn't enough to stop the inevitable. The bear's paw came down with devastating force. The claws, each as long as a dagger, tore through Ivan's neck in a single swipe. His head separated from his body in an instant, blood spraying in an arc that painted the ground red. The crowd's collective gasp turned into a chorus of screams as Ivan's lifeless body crumpled to the ground, his sacrifice a horrific spectacle. The bear didn't stop. It stood over Ivan's body and roared. For a moment it seemed that the nightmare would never end, the animal's dark eyes scanning the crowd for its next victim. But then something changed. Perhaps it was the realization that the threat had been destroyed, or maybe the noise finally overwhelmed the creature's senses. Whatever the reason, the bear backed away slowly, dragging its injured body toward the square's edge. The villagers held their breath, too afraid to move, as the beast disappeared into the forest, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. In the aftermath, the square was eerily silent. The villagers remained rooted in place, their eyes fixed on Ivan's mangled body. The man who had stood between them and certain death was gone, torn apart under their own eyes. When authorities arrived, they found a village in shock, its people haunted by what they had witnessed. Even Kuznetsov's body was retrieved with solemn care, his blood-stained uniform a grim reminder of his sacrifice. The bear was later tracked and killed by a team of hunters, and its body was examined to reveal the depths of its starvation. The villagers found little comfort in its death. The autumn festival, once a cherished tradition, became a symbol of tragedy, a day forever marked by the loss of a hero. In the following weeks, the people of Ust-Kut erected a small memorial in the town square, a plaque bearing Ivan Kuznetsov's name and a simple message of thanks. But no monument could erase the trauma or the fear that lingered. In June 2021, Liam Carter and Owen Brooks, lifelong friends, set off into a wilderness in the northern Rocky Mountains, spanning parts of south-central Montana and northwestern Wyoming. Their packs were loaded with camping gear and food. The plan was simple: 3 days of hiking, fishing, and stargazing under the pristine Montana sky. It was meant to be a break from the grind of their everyday lives, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. Neither could have imagined how their journey would end. On the second afternoon of the journey, the trail they were walking on narrowed as it wound along a steep ridgeline. The forest closed tightly on either side, the dense canopy blocking sunlight. They moved in single file, Liam in the lead. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and the faint rot of something decomposing. Liam paused, his boots scuffing against a rock as he sniffed the air. He felt uneasy, his usual enthusiasm silenced by a bad feeling Liam couldn't quite explain. Owen followed his eyes on the dirt trail. He carried a rifle over his shoulder, a much-needed precaution in Grizzly country. Owen wasn't much of a hunter, but the weapon had given them both a sense of security when they planned the trip. The tension broke in an instant. Around the next bend, the source of the rancid smell came into view. A mangled elk carcass, its ribcage jutting out. Flies buzzed in a frenzied cloud. It was a grotesque sight, but it wasn't the carcass that stopped them cold. It was the massive grizzly crouched over it, its jaws slick with blood, and its head snapping up at the sound of their approach. The bear's eyes locked onto them, black and shining with an intensity that froze the two men in place. For a brief moment, the world went silent, save for the low rumble that began deep in the bear's chest. Liam's breath caught. His legs refused to move. Then the bear charged. It moved easily, its muscles rippling beneath its dense fur as it thundered toward them. Liam shouted something incoherent, his voice rising in panic. He stumbled backward, but his boot caught a rock, and he fell hard onto the trail. Pain shot up his wrist as he instinctively threw his hands out to break his fall. The bear was on him in seconds. Owen, still standing a few feet behind, froze. His hands trembled as he reached for the rifle slung over his shoulder, but his fingers fumbled with the strap, his mind screaming to act or do something. The grizzly's roar shattered his resolve. The bear lunged at Liam, its jaws wide and teeth glistening. Liam kicked out desperately, his boot connecting with its snout. The bear recoiled slightly, shaking its massive head, then returned with a swipe of its paw. The force of the blow slammed into Liam's chest, tearing through his shirt and flesh like paper. Blood sprayed across the dirt trail, staining the earth dark. Liam screamed, the sound raw and primal, filled with a terror Owen had never heard before. Liam cried, begging his friend to help him. But Owen backed away. His heart thundered in his chest, his vision tunneling as adrenaline surged through his veins. The rifle slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the rocks below. His feet moved before he could think, carrying him off the trail and into the dense forest. Branches whipped at his face, and the sound of Liam's screams faded behind him. Liam fought with everything he had. He swung his arms, aiming punches at the bear's face, eyes, and nose. The bear responded with another swipe, this time catching Liam's arm. The bone snapped with a sickening crack, and his arm went limp. He screamed again, his voice hoarse, but there was no one to hear him now. The bear's jaws clamped down on his shoulder, its teeth sinking into muscle and bone. Liam's body was jerked violently as the bear shook him like a rag doll. He tried to think, to find a way to escape, but deep down he knew it was no use. The bear released him briefly, standing over his broken body. Blood poured from the gashes on Liam's chest and arm, pooling beneath him. His breaths came in shallow gasps, his vision blurring as shock set in. The bear growled low, then bit down on his neck. This time, the fight left Liam completely. When the bear finally retreated, dragging the elk carcass back into the underbrush, Liam's body lay motionless on the trail, the ground around him soaked with blood. The forest was silent again, as though nothing had happened. Owen ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed beneath a tree, his chest heaving and his hands shaking uncontrollably. The rifle was gone, left somewhere back on the trail. His thoughts were a chaotic mess of guilt, terror, and self-preservation. He told himself there was nothing he could have done, that the bear was unstoppable, that Liam's fate had been sealed when they stumbled into its territory. But deep down, he knew the truth. Days later, a search and rescue team found Owen wandering near a trailhead, dehydrated and disoriented. He told them he had been separated from Liam, that the bear had come out of nowhere and attacked before he could react. He said he had tried to help, but had been forced to flee when the bear turned on him. The rescuers found Liam's body the next day. The scene they described to authorities painted a grim picture of a desperate struggle and a brutal death. But the details didn't align with Owen's story. The rifle, found discarded in the bushes, hadn't been fired. The footprints on the trail showed no sign of a fight from anyone but Liam. When the truth came out, the reaction in their hometown was swift and unforgiving. Liam's family, devastated by the loss of their son, publicly condemned Owen for his cowardice. Friends who had once admired Owen now avoided him, their faces cold and unforgiving. Owen moved away within weeks, unable to bear the weight of the stares, the whispers, the accusations. But no matter how far he ran, he couldn't escape the image of Liam's bloodied body or the sound of his screams echoing through the forest. The memory clung to him like a shadow, a constant reminder of the friend he had abandoned, and the life he could never reclaim. In January 2021, the Northern Horizon Express rolled through the icy expanse of Siberia's Irkutsk region, a vast, unforgiving wilderness blanketed in snow. The freight train was hauling goods across the frozen landscape with a single passenger car attached at the rear. Among the travelers was 29-year-old Elena Makarova, a teacher returning home after visiting family. She had chosen the train for its reliability, but reliability was always a gamble deep in the Siberian wilderness. As the train rounded a curve, the steel tracks beneath it groaned in protest. Freezing rain from the previous night had coated the rails in a dangerous sheet of ice. Without warning, the train lurched violently. Screeching metal and shattering glass filled the air as cars derailed one after another, crashing into the snow like fallen giants. The passenger car skidded sideways, its wheels shearing off, before slamming into a stand of trees and coming to a halt. Inside, chaos reigned. Passengers were tossed like rag dolls, colliding with walls, seats, and each other. Elena braced herself against the seat in front of her, but the force of the crash flung her sideways. Pain flared in her ribs as she landed hard against the window, which had miraculously remained intact. The world outside tilted unnaturally, the snow-covered forest illuminated by the weak glow of the train's emergency lights. When the chaos subsided, groans and cries of pain replaced the deafening noise. Dazed, Elena pulled herself upright, her hands trembling. She wasn't seriously injured, though her ribs ached and her forehead throbbed from where she'd hit it. Around her, other passengers stirred, bloodied and shaken but alive. The temperature inside the car began to plummet as cold air seeped in through shattered windows and crumpled walls. Realizing they were stranded in the middle of nowhere, the group decided to exit the wreckage to assess the situation and wait for rescuers. They stepped into the biting cold, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The scene outside was surreal. Freight cars lay scattered across the snow, their contents spilled like the guts of a gutted beast. Broken trees jutted out at odd angles, and the faint smell of diesel mingled with the crisp winter air. Elena hugged her coat tightly, shivering as she joined the others near the passenger car. Some passengers scoured the wreckage for supplies, while others attempted to build a fire with splintered wood. The vast Siberian forest loomed around them, silent and watchful. Unbeknownst to the group, the crash had shattered more than steel and glass. Deep within the forest, the noise had disturbed a Russian grizzly bear hibernating in its den. Starved and disoriented, the bear emerged from its shelter, its massive body covered in frost and clumps of dirt. The scent of humans and spilled food wafted through the cold air, drawing it toward the wreckage. The survivors were still huddled together when the first warning came, a low growl that cut through the stillness, like a knife. Heads turned, confusion giving way to alarm. From the tree line, the bear appeared, its hulking frame blending with the shadows. It moved closer, its breath visible in the freezing air, eyes locked on the group. Panic erupted. Some screamed, others froze in place, while a few bolted for the wreckage, seeking refuge. Elena was among those who hesitated, her mind struggling to process the sight of the enormous predator. The bear wasted no time, charging at the group with terrifying speed. Elena turned to run, but the snow was deep, and her boots sank with every step. Behind her, the bear roared, a sound that seemed to shake the earth. The beast closed the distance effortlessly. The woman stumbled, her foot catching on a buried piece of debris. Before she could rise, the bear was on her. Its massive paw came down, raking her back with claws as sharp as knives. Elena screamed, the pain blinding as the bear's weight pressed her into the snow. The others watched in horror from the wreckage, too afraid to act. The bear bit into her shoulder, its jaws crunching through the bones. Blood stained the snow as Elena thrashed, trying desperately to escape. She clawed at the ground, her fingers digging into the frozen earth, but it was useless. The bear's sheer strength was overwhelming. Some passengers snapped out of their paralysis, grabbing pieces of debris, metal rods, broken wood, anything they could find. They shouted and waved their makeshift weapons to scare the bear off. One man hurled a chunk of metal, striking the bear on its flank. The beast growled in anger but didn't release Elena. The attack seemed to stretch on forever, though it was only minutes. The bear, realizing its commotion, finally lifted Elena's limp body in its jaws and began dragging her toward the forest. Her blood left a stark trail in the snow. The survivors continued shouting and throwing objects, but the bear paid them little attention. It vanished into the trees, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The snow where Elena had fallen was churned and red, and the ground was littered with scraps of her torn clothing and flesh. The group stood stunned, and what had just happened was sinking in. Some wept openly, while others stared blankly at the forest, their breath in ragged gasps. Hours later, rescue teams arrived, alerted by the train's automated distress signals. They found the survivors huddled in the wreckage, their faces pale and haunted. When the rescuers learned of the bear attack, they were horrified and unsurprised. Siberia was unforgiving, its wilderness indifferent to human tragedy. Elena's body was never recovered. Search teams ventured into the forest but found no trace of her beyond the blood trail. The bear, likely retreating to another den, left the area before it could be tracked. News of the derailment and the bear attack dominated headlines for the next few weeks, sparking debates about the risks of traveling through such remote and untamed areas. For the survivors, however, the real scars were psychological. The memory of Elena's screams, the bear's savage strength, and the sight of her being dragged into the trees would haunt them for the rest of their lives. It was early June 2018, and Clara Monroe's career had reached new heights. Known for her fearless reporting, 32-year-old Clara had gained a reputation for diving headfirst into dangerous situations to uncover the truth. Her latest assignment brought her to a national forest in western Wyoming, a vast expanse of wilderness increasingly marked by human-wildlife conflict. The rising number of bear encounters, attributed to changing environmental patterns, was a topic she felt compelled to expose. Accompanied by Ethan Hayes, a grizzled local guide with decades of experience, Clara planned to document the grizzlies' shifting behavior in their natural habitat. Following signs of bear activity, they trekked deep into the forest for days. Tracks crisscrossed muddy trails, claw marks scarred towering pines, and stripped-clean elk carcasses hinted at the predator's presence. Clara, armed with her camera and unwavering determination, captured every detail. Ethan carried the survival tools, bear spray, flares, and a rifle, though he was reluctant to use them unless necessary. By the fifth day, they had ventured further than most dared, reaching an area few had documented. The forest felt different here, denser, quieter. Even the birds seemed wary, their calls muted beneath the weight of the towering evergreens. The morning passed uneventfully, with Clara filming scenic shots while Ethan watched. Around midday, they stumbled upon a clearing where the pungent smell of decay hung in the air. A freshly killed elk lay sprawled in the center, its ribcage exposed, its flesh torn away in jagged strips. Ethan tensed immediately, scanning the surrounding trees. But Clara was over the moon. She felt like this was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. Unaware of the danger, the woman moved closer, adjusting her lens to capture the carnage. She marveled at the raw power on display, zooming in on the claw marks raked across the elk's flanks. Her focus was entirely on the shot, the importance of the story drowning out any sense of caution. Ethan's sharp intake of breath broke her concentration. He had spotted movement, a shadow emerging from the tree line. At first, it was little more than a ripple among the underbrush, but then the grizzly appeared. It was massive, easily over 700 pounds, its shoulders rippling with muscle, and it was watching them with dark and hungry eyes. The bear's reaction was immediate. It charged fearlessly. Ethan shouted a warning, but Clara, absorbed in her work, decided to ignore it. The camera stayed fixed on the grizzly, her hands steady even as her pulse quickened. Surely, she thought, she would have enough time to get out of the bear's path of destruction. But Ethan wasn't playing when it came to safety. The man grabbed her arm, yanking her back, but it was too late. The bear closed the distance with terrifying efficiency, its claws digging into the soft earth. Clara stumbled, her camera slipping from her grasp, and fell to the ground. The bear's roar was deafening as it loomed over her, rising onto its hind legs before crashing down. Its paw struck her with brutal force, flinging her sideways as if she weighed nothing. Clara's cry of pain was cut short as the bear descended, claws raking across her torso. Blood sprayed across the forest floor, stark against the greenery. Ethan fumbled for his flare, his heart pounding as he watched the scene unfold. Clara thrashed beneath the bear, her hands clawing at the ground, desperately trying to escape. The grizzly's jaws clamped down on her shoulder, its teeth puncturing flesh and bone. Her scream was primal, a sound that would haunt Ethan for the rest of his life. He finally activated the flare, the bright light and acrid smoke bursting into the air. He waved it wildly, shouting to draw the bear's attention. The animal paused, its massive head turning toward him, blood dripping from its muzzle. For a moment, Ethan thought it might charge him, but the flare's intensity seemed to unnerve it. Instead, the bear charged toward the forest and disappeared beyond the trees. Ethan dropped to his knees beside Clara, his hands trembling as he assessed her injuries. Her chest was a mess of torn flesh, her breathing shallow and labored. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the mossy ground. She tried to speak, her lips forming silent words, but the effort was too much. Ethan's hands hovered uselessly as her body went still, the flare still sputtering weakly beside him. He stared at her lifeless form, the weight of his failure crushing him. The forest around him seemed to close in, the silence now oppressive. In the aftermath, Ethan gathered her equipment, the camera miraculously intact despite the chaos. He carried it alongside her body as he made the long trek back to civilization. The journey was grueling, the weight of guilt heavier than the physical burden. When rescuers arrived, Clara's footage revealed the final moments of her life in chilling detail. The Grizzly's charge, her fall, and the ferocity of the attack were all captured with haunting clarity. The video sparked public outrage and debate, with experts dissecting every frame, analyzing the bear's behavior and the circumstances leading to the attack. Some blamed Clara's recklessness, arguing that her focus on capturing the perfect shot had cost her her life. Others pointed to the larger issue of environmental shifts, which had pushed wildlife closer to human activity. Ethan, though hailed as a hero by some for his attempt to save her, couldn't escape the weight of responsibility. He replayed the attack in his mind endlessly, questioning every decision, every second of hesitation. Clara's death became a grim reminder of the dangers lurking in the wilderness. Her story fueled discussions about the balance between journalistic ambition and personal safety, the ethics of encroaching on nature for the sake of a story, and the broader implications of human impact on wildlife. Life continued as it always had in the national forest in western Wyoming. But for Ethan, the scars of that day, both physical and emotional, would never fully heal. In July 2021, brothers Nathan and Ryan Parker set off into Wyoming's Wind River Range, eager to spend a few days immersed in the rugged backcountry they both loved. Seasoned hikers and experienced outdoors people, the brothers knew the risks of trekking through bear country. Armed with bear spray, whistles, and a solid knowledge of wildlife behavior, they felt prepared for anything nature could throw their way. But as the sun climbed high on the second day of their trip, they encountered something that caught them off guard: a grizzly bear cub. It was a small thing, no larger than a medium-sized dog, playing near a fallen tree stump. The cub played, occasionally swatting at something in the dirt with oversized paws. The brothers froze at first, their instincts kicking in. A lone cub was a dangerous sight. No matter how cute the cub was, it was also a red flag in the wilderness. They scanned the surrounding trees for any sign of the mother. For several long moments, there was nothing but silence. No snapping branches, no rustling foliage. Just the cub, rolling lazily in the dirt. Against their better judgment, they approached cautiously, enchanted by the scene unfolding before them. Nathan suggested the cub might be lost, separated from its mother. It wasn't unheard of. Ryan agreed but hesitated. His gut told him to stay back, to let nature take its course. Yet the sight of the helpless creature tugged at something deep inside him. They inched closer, keeping their movements slow and deliberate. The cub noticed them and stopped playing, tilting its head curiously. It mimicked their cautious steps, shuffling closer to the brothers as they crept forward. Its small, dark eyes sparkled with an almost childlike innocence. For a moment, Nathan and Ryan forgot where they were, the weight of their surroundings slipping away as they watched the cub's playful antics. But then, a growl rumbled from the forest. It came from the direction they had just scanned moments earlier. dense trees that had seemed empty and silent. Both men turned sharply toward the sound, their hearts pounding. The growl deepened, reverberating through the still air. Then the mother grizzly emerged. She was massive, a nightmarish creature. Her sheer size made the ground tremble as she stepped into the clearing. Her fur bristled, and her lips curled back to reveal yellowed teeth as long as daggers. Her eyes locked on the brothers, and her ears flattened against her head. She had seen enough to conclude that these two humans were too close to her cub. Nathan and Ryan both froze. They knew what was coming before it happened, but there was no time to react. The bear let out an explosive roar and charged. The grizzly covered the ground between them with terrifying speed. Nathan stumbled backward, fumbling for his bear spray. Ryan tried to shout, but the bear's growls swallowed the sound. Before either of them could act, the bear plowed into Ryan with the force of a freight train. The impact sent him sprawling, his body slamming into the hard ground with a sickening thud. Nathan screamed as the bear reared up, towering over his brother. Its claws gleamed in the sunlight, curved and deadly. It came down with incredible force, slashing across Ryan's chest. Blood sprayed onto the grass, staining the earth. Ryan writhed beneath the bear's massive weight, his arms flailing in an attempt to protect his head and neck. Nathan finally pulled the bear spray from his pack, his hands shaking as he aimed. He pressed the nozzle, releasing a cloud of orange mist toward the bear's face. The grizzly flinched, shaking violently as the irritant burned its eyes and nose. Its massive body pivoted toward Nathan. For a moment, Nathan thought it might turn its rage on him. The bear's bloodshot eyes locked onto him, its muscles coiling as if preparing to charge again. But then the cub released a high-pitched bleat from behind the tree stump. The mother turned, her ears swiveling toward the sound. With one final growl, she turned toward her cub and left Ryan writhing in agony. Nathan didn't wait to see where she went. He sprinted to Ryan's side, his mind racing as he tried to assess the damage. Ryan's chest was torn open, deep gashes crisscrossing his torso. Blood poured from the wounds, soaking into the dirt beneath him. His breathing was shallow, each gasp a desperate struggle. Nathan pressed his hands against the largest wound, trying to staunch the bleeding, but it was clear Ryan's injuries were serious. Time blurred as Nathan fumbled for his satellite phone, his fingers slick with blood. He called for help, his voice barely audible over his panicked breaths. The dispatcher promised a rescue team would be dispatched immediately, but Nathan knew they were deep in the wilderness. It would take hours for help to arrive. Ryan's eyes fluttered open briefly, his gaze unfocused. Nathan gripped his hand, willing him to hold on. The forest sounds seemed distant, muted, as if the world had paused to acknowledge the horror unfolding in this remote clearing. When the rescue team finally arrived by helicopter, Ryan was unconscious. Paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher. Nathan watched helplessly as the helicopter lifted off, carrying his brother toward what he hoped was salvation. Hours later, in the sterile halls of a hospital, Nathan received the news he had dreaded. Ryan's injuries were too severe. He had succumbed to blood loss and trauma during the flight. The weight of the news crushed Nathan, leaving him hollow. The incident sparked media attention, with headlines decrying the dangers of bear encounters and the consequences of misinterpreting wildlife behavior. Experts warned against approaching bear cubs, no matter how harmless they appeared. The Parkers' tragedy became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of nature's unpredictability. Nathan returned to the Wind River Range months later, unable to shake the memories of that day. The clearing where his brother had fallen was eerily quiet, the grass regrown over the blood-stained earth. Standing there, he realized the wilderness was beautiful, but ultimately indifferent to human hurt. In October 2020, Dr. Evan Wallace was deep into his research on grizzly bear behavior in a national park in the northwest corner of Wyoming. With a strong work ethic, He had spent weeks tracking bear activity, documenting their feeding patterns, and observing their behavior in preparation for a career-defining publication. His camp was in a remote valley near a river, far from tourists and day hikers. The isolation allowed him to immerse himself in his work, but it also came with risks. The last week had been relentless. Evan barely slept, determined to capture every piece of data. His campsite was a hub of activity: motion sensor cameras, scent traps, and even an animal carcass dragged into the area to draw bears closer for observation. It was a calculated risk, but one he believed he had mitigated with proper precautions. The night of October 17th was bitterly cold. A strong wind whipped through the valley, and the sky, devoid of clouds, glittered with stars. Exhausted, Evan had fallen into a heavy sleep inside his small nylon tent, his laptop still open beside him. He had no idea that the scent of the carcass, just 50 yards from camp, had drawn the attention of something massive lurking in the darkness. The grizzly moved silently, its hulking frame barely making a sound as it approached the camp. The bear had likely been following the scent trail for hours, its instincts honed by years of surviving in the national park's harsh conditions. At first, it circled the perimeter, sniffing the air and picking up traces of Evan's presence, human but alone and vulnerable. The bear's curiosity turned to boldness. It pushed through the camp's outer edge, its nose twitching as it followed the mingling scents of the carcass and human. Evan's tent, though zipped tightly, did little to mask the smells within. The bear's breathing quickened as it approached the flimsy structure, its claws raking against the earth with every step. Without warning, the grizzly swiped at the tent. The nylon ripped open like paper, exposing Evan's sleeping form. Sharp, icy air flooded the tent, but Evan, lost in the depths of exhaustion, didn't stir. The bear's head pushed inside, its wet nose brushing against his shoulder. Without warning, the bear's jaws clamped down on Evan's leg, dragging him halfway out of the tent in a single, brutal motion. The sudden pain jolted him awake, but his groggy mind struggled to process the chaos. The bear's claws followed, raking across his torso, tearing through his jacket and flesh with horrifying ease. Evan screamed, his instincts finally kicking in, but it was too late. The bear's massive paw struck him across the chest, the force of the blow snapping ribs like twigs. Blood spattered across the shredded remnants of the tent, staining the ground. He tried to crawl away, his hands clawing at the dirt, but the bear pinned him with its weight, the sheer size of its frame overwhelming him completely. The bear's jaws sought his neck, its powerful teeth puncturing deep into flesh and muscle. Evan's attempts to fight back grew weaker with every second, his movements slowing as blood loss took its toll. The bear's growls echoed through the camp, a terrifying reminder of its dominance, its primal power unleashed without mercy. Around the campsite, the chaos became evident. Motion sensor cameras, still active, captured fragments of the attack. The bear's silhouette towering over Evan's crumpled form, its massive head jerking as it tore into its prey. The equipment scattered across the ground seemed almost mocking in its uselessness. The attack lasted minutes, though it felt like an eternity. When the bear finally retreated, dragging Evan's broken body toward the edge of the camp, it left behind a scene of devastation. The tent was shredded, the carcass bait untouched, and the air reeked of blood and earth. By morning, fellow researchers, stationed miles away, arrived at the camp to check on Evan after he failed to respond to scheduled radio calls. What they found shook them to their cores. The ground was stained dark red, claw marks gouged deep into the earth. Evan's mangled remains lay partially buried near the tree line, a sign that the bear had begun caching its kill. The team's shock quickly gave way to dread. Evan's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a reminder of the dangers that even the most experienced individuals faced in the wild. His exhaustion, a byproduct of his dedication, had likely dulled his ability to sense danger. The camp's proximity to the carcass, intended to be an asset to his research, had sealed his fate. Wildlife authorities and park officials were called in to investigate. The bear responsible for the attack, identified by tracks and camera footage, was classified as a high-risk threat to humans, tracked down, and euthanized. The decision sparked heated debates among conservationists, many of whom argued that the bear had acted on instinct, its aggression fueled by hunger and the encroachment of human activity into its territory. Evans' colleagues mourned him deeply, but his death also forced them to confront harsh realities. The risks they accepted as part of their work were not abstract. The wilderness did not differentiate between predator and prey, researcher and wanderer. The bizarre nature of the event captured widespread attention. News outlets highlighted the incident, raising questions about safety protocols in bear country. Experts debated whether sleep deprivation and the use of bait had contributed to the tragedy, and calls for stricter guidelines grew louder. For those who knew Evan personally, the public discourse did little to dull their grief. He had been a brilliant researcher whose passion for wildlife was matched only by his drive to make a difference. His final moments, though horrifying, were a testament to the unpredictability of the natural world he sought to understand.